Daddy bought Fat Mama for $1. Mountain man's daughter finds an obese woman as her new mom. They were selling her for less than a bottle of whiskey. By late afternoon, the sun over Goldfield, Nevada bled orange across the dusty main square, turning every shadow long and mean. On the steps of the town hall, a young woman sat chained like a criminal, wrists bound in rough rope, ankles locked in rusted iron. Her crime was existing in a body the town had decided was unforgivable. Beatrice Walsh, 21, stared at nothing. Her blue eyes were dull, emptied of fight long before the day began. She was 5'4" and near 230 pounds, stuffed into a faded brown dress that had seen too many winters and too little kindness. Her cheeks were round, sunburned and streaked with dried salt, where tears had long ago stopped falling. Around her neck hung a plank of wood, the letters carved deep and painted a furious red. For sale. $1, no returns. Below that, some helpful soul had added in smaller, uglier words, fat, lazy, useless. Good for hard labor if you don't mind the smell. She'd been sitting there since morning, no food, no water, no shade, just the stares, just the laughter, just the knowledge that her father had decided $1 was a fair trade for his only child. Prices down again. A woman's sharp voice crowed from the edge of the crowd. Started at $5. Now look at her. End of day discount. The cluster of respectably dressed women roared with laughter. Their corsets were tight, their gloves spotless, their mouths full of poison. I wouldn't take her if they paid me, another scoffed. Can you imagine that thing lumbering around your kitchen? She'll sink any bed she lies on, a third added. Harold Walsh should just throw her in the river and be done with it. A pack of young men wandered by, smelling of sweat and cheap liquor. One scooped a clod of dirt from the ground and hurled it at Beatrice. It struck her shoulder, leaving a smear on the already stained fabric. "Roll over, hog," he yelled. "You're spoiling the view." Beatrice didn't flinch. She didn't even look up. Something inside her had gone quiet a long time ago, back when fat and ugly had stopped being insults and turned into a sentence. Off to the side, Harold Walsh slumped in a wooden chair, a whiskey bottle dangling from his fingers. His nose was red, his eyes unfocused, his vest straining over a belly earned from cards and liquor, not work. $1, he shouted hoarsely. Ripe and strong, eats like 2 men, works like 3. Someone take her off my hands. A paunchy rancher sauntered closer, eyeing Beatrice like he might a mule. He squeezed the flesh of her upper arm without so much as a "by your leave." "She got any skills?" he asked. "Cook? Wash? Anything?" "She'll work," Harold lied easily. "Girl's strong as an ox. Just needs a firm hand." The man grunted, wrinkled his nose as if she smelled of something worse than dust and fear, and walked away. "Too ugly," he muttered. "Don't want to look at that over my supper." The words barely registered. Beatrice's mind drifted somewhere far from the square, from the women who'd mocked her since childhood, from the stepfather who'd beaten her for eating too much, from the mother who'd called her a monster and left. Maybe, she thought faintly, if no one buys me, he'll do it. He'll throw me in the river. Maybe that would be easier. The crowd stirred. Hoofbeats thudded on the hard-packed street. A wagon rolled to a stop at the edge of the square. A tall man climbed down from the driver's seat, boots hitting the ground with a solid thump that turned heads. Nathaniel Cooper, Nate to the few who dared shorten his name, stood head and shoulders above most men in Goldfield. Broad-shouldered, thick-armed, his flannel shirt stretched across a chest hardened by years of chopping wood and hauling game. Black beard, dark eyes, the look of a man who belonged to the mountains more than any town. Beside him hopped down a small girl of 8 with 2 dark braids, a worn blue dress, and a stuffed bear clutched in her arms. "Daddy, look," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve as her gaze locked on the chained woman on the steps. "Daddy, look." He followed her line of sight, to the iron shackles, to the red, raw wrists, to the $1 sign hanging like a sentence around the young woman's neck, and to eyes, exhausted, hopeless, but still startlingly blue, that looked for one brief second almost exactly like the eyes of the wife he'd buried 3 years ago. If you're listening to this right now, where in the world are you? Tell me in the comments. I read as many as I can. Emma Cooper stood rooted to the spot, her small hand fisted in the fabric of her father's coat. For a heartbeat, the bustling square, the jeers, the dust, all of it fell away. There was only her, the chained woman on the steps, and a memory. "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling. "Daddy, that's her." Nate frowned, following the line of his daughter's gaze. "That's who, Bug?" "Mom." The single word left Emma's mouth with absolute certainty, cutting straight through Nate's chest. He swallowed hard. "Emma, no." "She is," Emma insisted, tugging away from him with a strength born of sudden hope. "That's my mama. You promised she'd come back one day." Before he could stop her, Emma ran. Her boots slapped against the hard-packed ground as she scrambled up the steps and dropped to her knees in front of Beatrice. She was so small compared to the shackled woman. 2 little brown braids, a threadbare dress, a stuffed bear hanging from one hand. "Mama?" Emma breathed. Her voice wobbled as she reached for Beatrice's bound hands. "Mama, it's me. It's Emma. I missed you so much. Why are you tied up? Who hurt you?" The square erupted in laughter. "Did you hear that?" Someone cackled. "The Cooper brat thinks the hog is her mama." "Poor thing must be half blind," another chimed in. Beatrice flinched at the word hog, but her gaze was locked on the little girl gripping her fingers. No one had touched her gently in years. Her skin was cracked and raw from rope and sun, yet Emma held her as if she were something precious. Beatrice tried to speak, but her throat was dry, her voice a rasp of sand. "I'm not." The denial died on her tongue when she met Emma's eyes, wide, warm, trust shining through tears. No one had ever looked at Beatrice like that. Nate strode forward, jaw clenched, wanting, needing to pull his daughter away from this stranger, this mess, this humiliation in front of half the town. But when he reached the bottom step and really saw Beatrice up close, he froze. She wasn't Catherine. His late wife had been soft like this, yes, with the same generous curves and steady presence. But the resemblance was in the eyes, blue as a winter sky, full of a quiet kindness the world had taken advantage of too often. 3 years ago, he had held Catherine's hand as fever burned the life out of her. In one of her last lucid moments, she gripped his fingers and whispered, "Promise me you'll find Emma another mama. She needs a woman's heart, Nate. Don't let her grow up alone." He had promised, then failed. He'd buried himself in the mountains instead, hunting game, chopping wood, doing everything except the one thing his wife had asked, giving Emma a mother. Now Emma was clinging to a stranger in chains, calling her Mama with a desperation that ripped his soul open. "Emma," Nate said roughly, climbing the steps. "Let go, Bug." That isn't. She is, Emma sobbed, pressing her forehead against Beatrice's bruised knuckles. She has Mama's eyes. You said Mama had kind eyes. These are kind eyes. Daddy, don't you see? The crowd watched like it was some cruel performance put on just for them. Near the edge, Harold Walsh staggered to his feet, smelling of sweat and whiskey. "Hey, mountain man," he slurred, "you looking to buy? I got a bargain for you. $1, less than a decent pair of boots." Nate turned slowly, his gaze sharpening. "You're selling your daughter?" "Daughter, maid, mistake. What's the difference?" Harold shrugged. "She eats too much, cries too much, and scares off decent men. I got debts. She's heavy. Might as well turn her into money." Something dark and dangerous flared in Nate's eyes. "She's a person," Harold snorted. "She's a burden." He shook the bottle. "You want her or not? Sun's going down. If nobody takes her, I've got other ways to rid myself of the problem. The implication hung in the air. The river, the canyon, the kind of solution men like Harold chose when they were tired of feeding what they refused to love. Emma clutched Beatrice's hand tighter. "Daddy, please, don't let him hurt her. Please." Nate looked at his daughter, at the stranger she'd decided was hers, at the town he'd never trusted, at the man who could talk about throwing his own child away like she was spoiled meat. A mountain man learned early to listen to storms, to the way the wind changed just before lightning struck. This moment felt like that, a shift in the air, a line he either stepped across or walked away from forever. His fingers brushed the inside of his coat, found the small leather pouch he kept there. Inside were coins from his last fur sale. Not much. Enough for supplies, ammunition, flour, salt. Things he needed. He pulled out a single silver dollar and let it drop at Harold's feet. "I'll take her," Nate said. The square went silent. Then noise crashed back in. Whistles, hoots, cruel laughter. "He's lost his mind. Must be lonely up on that mountain. Bet he'll work her like a plow horse." Harold scooped up the coin, his grin split in his flushed face. "She's yours now, Cooper. No refunds." He swayed as he backed away. "You break her. You keep the pieces." He didn't even look at Beatrice as he left. Nate knelt, pulling a knife from his belt. Beatrice flinched, instinct screaming that pain was coming, always coming. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low but not unkind. "I'm cutting the ropes, not you." The blade slid between rope and raw skin with practiced precision. One tug, then another, and the bindings fell away. He moved to her ankles next, working the stubborn rusted chain until it clattered to the stone. "Stand if you can," he said. "We're leaving." Beatrice tried. Her legs, numb from hours of stillness, buckled. She lurched forward. Nate's arms closed around her automatically, solid, steady, shockingly gentle for a man his size. She fit against him awkwardly at first, all soft curves and trembling breath, but his grip adjusted, supporting her as if he'd done this 1,000 times. He could feel the bones beneath the flesh, the exhaustion in every muscle. This was not laziness. This was a body that had carried too much for too long. "I've got you," he said quietly. Emma wrapped her arms around Beatrice's waist. "We're going home now, Mama." Beatrice's lips parted. I'm not, maybe not yet." Nate cut in, his voice gruff. "But my girl needs you, and I paid for you. That makes you my responsibility now." He lifted his gaze to the gawking crowd, his stare turning sharp as steel. "Show's over," he said. "You had your fun." Then he guided Beatrice down the steps. one careful step at a time, with Emma clinging to her side like a child afraid someone might steal her new treasure. They crossed the square under a hail of whispered insults and brittle laughter, climbed into the wagon, and rolled out of Goldfield. For $1, a mountain man had just bought an unwanted woman. For that same dollar, a little girl believed she'd finally gotten her mama back. And somewhere between those two truths, all three of their lives had started to change. The wagon creaked as it left the last lantern-lit edge of Goldfield behind. The laughter, the insults, the metallic clatter of chains falling from Beatrice's ankles, all of it slowly dissolved into the dusk. Ahead stretched only the open road, flanked by sagebrush and wind that carried the smell of dust and faraway pine. Beatrice sat stiffly on the wooden seat, her trembling hands knotted together in her lap. She didn't dare look at Nate. She didn't dare look at anyone. The humiliation on the steps still clung to her like a second skin. Every breath felt tight, every heartbeat, a reminder of the way people had stared, pointed, mocked. Emma, however, was blissfully untouched by the cruelty of grown-ups. She sat between Beatrice and Nate, leaning warmly into Beatrice's side, humming to herself as though she were riding home with family. "Are you cold, Mama?" the child asked suddenly, tugging at Beatrice's sleeve. Beatrice jolted. I'm not—" "She's not your mother," Nate said automatically, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Emma frowned, looking up at him. "Not yet," she corrected softly, and with the confidence of someone who believed beyond doubt that the world would eventually bend to her words. "But she will be. You'll see." Nate inhaled sharply, but didn't argue. Beatrice swallowed, guilt and something like longing knotting in her chest. "Sweetheart," she whispered, choosing each word carefully, "I'm not your mama, but I'm here with you." Emma beamed, leaning her head on Beatrice's arm as though that settled the matter completely. The wagon rocked onward through the growing chill. The sun dipped behind the ridge, throwing long shadows over the dirt path. Nate flicked the reins lightly, keeping the horses moving at a careful, steady pace up the mountain slope. "How far is it?" Beatrice asked quietly, not wanting to disturb Emma's content humming. "Couple hours," Nate said without looking at her. "Cabin's near the timberline." "Oh," her voice faltered. I've never been up a mountain before." "Ain't complicated," Nate muttered. "You put one foot in front of the other, same as anywhere." Beatrice nodded, though the trembling in her hands didn't stop. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, soul-deep exhausted, but fear kept her rigid. She was being taken somewhere she didn't know by a man she barely knew, and yet she'd felt safer in his arms than she had in years. "Are you hungry?" Emma asked suddenly. Beatrice blinked. No, I'm fine." The truth was, her stomach had been empty since dawn, but habit had long taught her not to admit need. When you lived with someone like Harold Walsh, hunger was seen as a moral failing. Asking for food was an invitation for mockery. Better to stay silent. Emma scrunched her face, unconvinced. "Daddy, she's lying like you do." Nate huffed. "I don't lie. You said you weren't cold last winter and your beard had ice on it. That's different." "No, it's not." Emma rummaged in a small cloth sack at her feet, pulled out a small tin lunchbox, and proudly popped it open. Inside were 2 pieces of cornbread and a strip of dried venison. She pushed it toward Beatrice. "Here, Mom, Beatrice, you can have mine." Beatrice froze. No one had ever offered her their portion. She stared at the cornbread as if it were gold, but habit made her gently push it back. I can't. That's your dinner." Emma shook her head. "Daddy has more at home. He always does. He's like a bear who hides food everywhere." Nate muttered under his breath, "I do not hide food. I store it." "Then why did I find jerky under your pillow?" Nate shot her a warning look. Emma giggled. Beatrice couldn't help it. Her lips twitched. The smallest ghost of a smile appearing before fear smothered it. She lowered her eyes. "Thank you, Emma." She took a small bite, and it was as though her body remembered hunger in an instant. Warmth spread through her chest, painful and comforting all at once. Nate glanced at her, barely turning his head. "Eat the rest," he said quietly. Beatrice hesitated. "I don't want to take—" "You're not taking," he cut in, voice firm. "I said eat." Something in his tone wasn't harsh. It was protective, almost gentle beneath the gravel. Beatrice obeyed, nibbling the cornbread until it was gone, her stomach easing for the first time in a long while. The wagon climbed higher. The air grew colder. Stars emerged above them like scattered diamonds. At one point, the wheels hit a rut. The wagon jolted violently. Beatrice gasped as she lurched sideways, her shoulder bumping hard into Nate's broad arm. Sorry." "You don't have to apologize for hitting a bump," he said, voice low and almost irritated. Not at her, but at the idea she felt the need to be so small. Beatrice clasped her hands tighter, unsure what to say. Emma fell asleep as they climbed higher, her head resting on Beatrice's thigh. Beatrice, afraid of shifting and waking her, sat completely still, letting the child's weight settle warmly against her. For the first time in years, someone leaned on her without contempt. Nate noticed. He kept his eyes on the road, but something in the way he held the reins softened. "She likes you," he murmured. Beatrice stroked Emma's hair gently. She's a wonderful girl." "Hard not to love her," Nate added, quiet. "She's all I've got." Beatrice's heart squeezed. "She won't lose you," she whispered. He didn't respond right away, but she sensed his gaze flick toward her briefly in the darkness. "You don't know that," he said, softer still. "Life takes what it wants." The sorrow in those 6 words hit Beatrice harder than any insult she'd ever endured. She wanted to ask about his wife, but something told her not yet. Instead, she said the only thing that felt true. "I'm sorry for whatever you've lost." The silence that followed wasn't cold this time. It was closer, warmer, fragile. The air shifted as the wagon rounded the final bend. Lantern light flickered against the dark outline of a tall cabin built of thick pine logs, smoke curling gently from its chimney. "Home," Nate murmured. Beatrice stared, breath catching. It was sturdy, warm, safe, things she had never had. Nate climbed down first, lifting Emma with one arm and then turning to help Beatrice. She hesitated, but his hands were already there, large, steady, waiting. For the first time since the square, she let herself lean into him, not because she had no choice, but because it felt safe. The cabin smelled of pine wood, warm broth, and a faint trace of tobacco from Nate's pipe. When the door swung shut behind them, the world outside disappeared. No laughter, no insults, no shackles, no townsfolk who wanted to watch a woman break. Only the soft crackle of fire and the hum of a life Beatrice had never dared imagine. Emma stirred in Nate's arms as he carried her to her room. "Daddy, Mama's here, right? She'll still be here tomorrow?" Nate paused in the doorway, his back to Beatrice. "She's here," he murmured. Sleep now." The little girl's fingers loosened, her breathing deepened, and Nate tucked her beneath the patchwork quilt. Then he stepped back into the main room, and for the first time since leaving Goldfield, the air between him and Beatrice felt real. No child's hopeful fantasy, no bustling crowd, no forced roles, just a man and the woman he'd bought. Beatrice stood near the hearth, arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to disappear. Her clothes were still dusty, torn at the hem. Rope burns marked her wrists and ankles. Her hair, long, wavy, dark honey brown, hung in tangled knots. Nate took her in quietly. She flinched under his gaze. If you want me to sleep outside, I can. I've slept in barns before, and—" "No." His voice cut through her fear like an axe splitting wood. "You sleep inside, in the spare room. I won't have you freezing." Beatrice nodded quickly. "Thank you. I won't be trouble." Nate exhaled hard, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're not trouble. Just sit. You look ready to fall over." When she obeyed, he moved around the cabin, gathering blankets, a towel, and a bowl of warm water. He set them on the table beside her without a word. The firelight carved shadows across his jaw, the sharp planes of his face softened only by the exhaustion lining his eyes. "You can wash up here," he said. "I'll keep my back turned." Beatrice froze. Her breath hitched. No man had ever offered such decency. Most would have demanded the opposite. "You don't—" Her throat closed. "You don't want to check my body for injuries?" Nate stiffened. He turned his back to her, staring into the fire as though it were the only thing in the room. When he spoke, his voice was low, roughened by something sharp. "I ain't that kind of man." The word struck her harder than any kindness ever had. He gave her time. She washed her face, neck, and arms, wincing as the warm water touched rope burns. When she realized her wrists were bleeding, she tried to hide it, tugging her sleeves down. Nate didn't look, not once. He just tossed another log into the fire and kept his hands busy, keeping his eyes elsewhere out of respect she had never received before. When she finally whispered, "I'm done," he turned. His gaze landed on her wrists, and a muscle ticked in his jaw. "You should have said something," he muttered, rising to fetch a tin of salve. "Let me see." Beatrice shook her head violently. "No, I can do it." "Your hands are shaking. Give them here." Slowly, she extended her arms. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of chopping wood and skinning hides, but his touch was delicate. He spread salve over the raw skin, wrapping soft cloth around each wrist. "No one should have tied you like that," he said quietly. Beatrice stared down at his hands. "It wasn't the worst thing he did to me." Nate's hand stilled. His eyes rose to hers. In the depths of those warm brown irises was a storm. She looked away quickly, afraid of what he might see if she let him look too long. After a moment, he tied the last knot. "There," he said, stepping back. "Should heal fine." Beatrice whispered her thanks. He cleared his throat. "The spare room is down the hall next to Emma's. It was my wife's sewing room. It's small, but the bed's good." Beatrice felt her heart twist. "Your wife. I'm sorry. Emma told me she was gone." Nate nodded once stiffly. 3 years now. Silence unfurled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy, with things unspoken. "I'll do my best," Beatrice whispered. "I'll take care of Emma. I'll earn my keep." Nate looked at her for a long moment, the fire reflecting off his dark eyes. "Taking care of Emma ain't earning your keep. You're here because she chose you." Beatrice blinked rapidly, confused. "Chose me?" She won't admit it, but she's been searching for someone to fill the hole Catherine left. She saw something in you she didn't see in anyone else in town." Beatrice's throat tightened painfully. I'm not strong, or pretty, or clever." Nate shook his head. "Strength ain't about how big your muscles are, and pretty ain't got a damn thing to do with a dress size." His gaze softened in a way she wasn't prepared for. "And clever? You survived Harold Walsh. That alone makes you clever as hell." Beatrice's breath hitched. "You don't know what he's like." "I know enough. I saw your eyes on those steps, and I saw how the town treated you." He stepped closer, but not threateningly, more like a man trying to see clearly for the first time. "You've lived through things people like them couldn't survive a day. Don't tell me that ain't strength." Her knees nearly buckled. No one had ever spoken to her that way. No one had ever looked at her without disgust, or with quiet, unmistakable recognition. Nate cleared his throat suddenly, stepping back as if afraid he'd said too much. "It's late. Get some rest." Beatrice nodded and moved toward the hallway, but halfway there she turned back. "Nate." He looked up. "Thank you," she whispered. Something flickered across his face, something she couldn't name, something soft, something wounded, something almost warm. "You're welcome," he said gruffly. She disappeared into the spare room, closing the door softly behind her. Nate remained by the fire for a long time, staring into the flames, jaw set, thoughts running like restless horses. He had brought her home for Emma, nothing more. That had been the plan. Simple, contained, controlled. But tonight, in the dim glow of firelight, he had seen something he hadn't expected. Not Catherine, not a replacement, not a debt or a duty. A woman with sorrow deeper than the canyons, a heart vast as the plains, and a quiet courage born from surviving people who should have loved her. And somewhere under all the fear and shame, that courage was beginning to wake. Upstairs, Beatrice lay in a real bed for the first time in years. She pulled the quilt to her chin, inhaling the faint smell of lavender that clung to the pillow. It was the smell of safety. She cried silently, not from pain, but from relief, and whispered into the darkness, "I'm home. I'm really home." By mid-December, the mountains were wrapped in white. Snow coated the cabin roof in thick, glittering layers. Icicles hung from the eaves like glass teeth. Smoke rose from the chimney in a steady plume, warm against the winter sky. Inside, life settled into a rhythm, simple, quiet, and strangely fragile, like a song no one wanted to disturb. Beatrice had never known such peace. Each morning she woke before dawn to light the stove, brew coffee, and warm the cabin before Emma opened her sleepy eyes. She swept the floors, scrubbed pots until they shone, patched Emma's mittens, and learned to cook meals hearty enough for a mountain man. She grew stronger. She smiled more. Her cheeks flushed warmly from the firelight instead of embarrassment. But the peace didn't come without shadows. One evening, while Emma colored at the table with a blue crayon she guarded like treasure, Nate returned from checking the boundary traps with a grim expression. Snow clung to his coat, melting slowly against the heat of his skin. "Tracks," he said, shaking off his gloves. Beatrice looked up from kneading bread dough. "Animal?" "Not this time." Nate's voice dropped to a tone that made the air in the room shift. "Boot prints. More than one. Someone's been close to the cabin." Emma glanced up, frowning. "Bandits?" Nate hesitated, casting a quick look toward Beatrice. Could be hunters, could be trespassers. But Beatrice knew from the tight line of his jaw that he didn't believe his own words. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. "Do you think they're looking for something?" Nate removed his coat and hung it by the hearth. "Maybe. Or maybe they're just stupid enough to wander up this far." Beatrice didn't miss the protective glance he cast toward Emma. A soft unease crept through her chest, the kind she'd known all her life, but had hoped to bury here among the pines. "If someone dangerous came, would they know about me?" Nate paused mid-motion. "Why would they know about you?" Silence fell, heavy, telling. She swallowed. "My father owed money to the wrong kind of men. They came to the house more than once, asking for him, threatening me, saying they'd collect what was owed however they had to." Emma dropped her crayon. "Collect? Like taking things?" Beatrice forced a gentle smile. "It's nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart." But Nate's eyes darkened. "You didn't mention any of that." "I didn't want to burden you," Beatrice whispered. "You already did so much." Nate stepped closer, the fire casting broad shadows over his frame. "You're not a burden. Anything that threatens you threatens Emma, and that makes it my business." Her breath caught. He didn't say, "my responsibility." He didn't say, "the woman I bought." He said, "you." Emma, oblivious to the grown-up tension, suddenly gasped. "Mama, can you braid my hair now, please?" Nate froze. Beatrice froze. Emma blinked at the silence. "Did I say something wrong?" Beatrice knelt beside her, smoothing her soft, dark curls. "No, sweetheart, you didn't." She began to braid gently, fingers steady despite the ache building in her chest. But Nate stepped away, his jaw tight, and disappeared into the cold evening outside. Later, after Emma was tucked into bed, Beatrice found him on the porch. Snow drifted down in soft flakes, dusting his hair and shoulders. He stood rigid, staring into the dark forest. "You shouldn't be out here without a coat," she murmured. "I needed air." She stepped closer, the porch creaking under her weight. "Did Emma upset you?" "No." His voice was low. "Not her." "Me, then." Silence. Beatrice wrapped her arms around herself, breath fogging in the cold. "I'm sorry. She's confused. She misses her real mother." "She's not confused," Nate said sharply. Then more quietly, "She's hoping." Beatrice's heart twisted. "I don't want to take Catherine's place. I'm not trying to." "She didn't ask for Catherine." Nate turned, meeting her gaze with a raw, unguarded expression she'd never seen before. "She asked for a mother." Beatrice exhaled shakily. "And what do you ask for, Nate?" Another silence, another breath of cold wind threading between them. "I ask for what I don't deserve." His words were barely audible. "Peace. Someone who makes the cabin feel like more than wood and nails." Her breath hitched. "I didn't bring you here for me," he continued, voice roughening. "But you cook meals I forgot I missed. You laugh with Emma. You hum while you sweep. Damn it, Beatrice, you make the place feel alive again." She swallowed hard. "And is that bad?" "It scares me," he admitted, "because I paid $1 for you and now I—" He stopped himself. "And now you what?" she whispered. Nate stared at her. Snowflakes landed on his lashes, melting instantly from the heat beneath. "I'm starting to care," he said finally. "More than I meant to. More than makes sense. More than a man like me has earned." Beatrice stepped closer without thinking. "You think caring is something you earn? Nate, caring is something you offer, something you choose." His voice dropped. I'm choosing wrong. You've suffered enough without me confusing things." Beatrice reached out then, hesitant, gentle, and took his hand. "You're not confusing me. You're saving me." He flinched, not away, but as though the words pierced him. "Beatrice, you gave me a home, a bed, safety, and you never once looked at me the way everyone else did. That alone is more kindness than I've had in 21 years. He clenched her hand. "I was cold to you." "But you didn't hate me," she whispered. "You didn't hurt me." His chest rose and fell with a trembling breath. "You deserve better than a man with a broken past," he murmured, "and you deserve better than a woman sold for $1. Nate's eyes softened, slowly, cautiously, like a man stepping onto a frozen lake he wasn't sure would hold him. The forest winds howled softly, but the space between them was still. "I won't let anyone take you," Nate said at last. "Not your father's men, not anyone." Then, without warning, 3 sharp cracks echoed from deep within the trees. Gunshots. Close. Nate grabbed Beatrice, pulling her behind him instinctively. His voice dropped to a whisper edged with steel. "They've found us." Beatrice's blood turned to ice, but she didn't scream. She didn't crumble, because Nate's hand stayed locked around hers, firm, steady, a promise forged in the dark. The 4th gunshot cracked through the forest like a snapped bone. Nate didn't flinch. He reacted. One hand seized Beatrice's wrist. The other grabbed the rifle leaning beside the porch door. In a single sweep, he pulled her inside and kicked the door shut behind them. "Stay away from the windows," he said, voice low, breath steady. Emma's small voice rose from the hallway. "Daddy?" Nate froze for half a heartbeat. Then he crouched and spoke with the gentleness of a man who would burn the world down for one child. "Bug, go to Mama. Go to Beatrice, now." Emma ran into Beatrice's trembling arms. Beatrice gathered her close, shielding her instinctively. Her own heart thundered in her throat, but Emma's tiny fingers dug into her dress, and that gave her courage. "Nate," Beatrice whispered, is it them?" "I don't know," Nate answered, eyes scanning the windows, rifle raised. "But they fired close, too damn close." Beatrice's breath quivered. She'd been hunted before. By creditors, by drunkards, by her own father's fists. But this was different. This wasn't running with no one to protect her. This time, she had someone worth fighting for, and someone fighting for her. Nate moved through the cabin with deliberate precision, checking each window slit. 2 men, he murmured, maybe 3, staying low, trained enough not to spook the horses. Beatrice tightened her grip on Emma. "What do we do?" "What I always do." Nate chambered around. "Protect what's mine." The words hit her like a blow, not because they hurt, but because they soothed something she hadn't known was raw. Mine. Not the way Harold said it, not ownership, not debt, a vow. Footsteps crunched in the snow, soft, calculated. They were circling the cabin. Emma buried her face in Beatrice's shoulder. "Mama, I'm scared." "Mama." The word, spoken so easily by a child, hit Beatrice's chest with a fierce, aching tenderness. She kissed Emma's hair. "It's okay, darling. I'm here. Daddy's here." Nate glanced back. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Beatrice," he whispered sharply, "take Emma to the storage room. Back wall. There's a trap door. Hide down there until I say—" "No." The word escaped before she could stop it. Nate blinked. "No?" "I'm not leaving you alone," she said, voice shaking but fierce. "I won't hide while you fight for us." "That's not your choice," he said, stepping toward her. "I won't have you in the line of fire. And I won't have you bleed alone." For a moment, breath hung white between them. Nate swallowed hard. "Beatrice, this isn't bravery. This is danger, real danger." "I know." She stepped closer, Emma in her arms. "But you told me I was strong, stronger than I think. Let me stand beside you." Her voice cracked. "I spent years being treated like nothing, but in this cabin, with you and Emma, I finally feel like someone. I won't lose that without a fight." Nate stared at her, as though truly seeing her for the first time. Not the woman he bought, not a burden, not a duty, a partner. He lowered his rifle slightly. "Stay behind the table. If they break the door, go through the back window and run for the ridge. Understand?" She nodded. "Good." Nate exhaled. "You stay in my sight. Both of you." Snow crunched again, closer this time. Nate moved to the door, positioning himself in the shadow where moonlight couldn't reveal his shape. A voice called from outside, slurred and cruel. "Cooper, we know you're in there." Beatrice's stomach dropped. That voice, that rasping, whiskey-soaked snarl, Harold Walsh, her father. Emma gasped into her shoulder. Nate's jaw clenched so hard a vein jumped in his temple. Another voice chimed in, higher, sharper. "You owe money, mountain man. Or maybe that fat sow you bought is worth more than $1." Beatrice flinched, but Nate didn't turn, didn't waver. He raised his rifle. "If you want her," he growled, "you'll have to die for her." Silence. Then smirking laughter echoed through the trees. "Come out and pay up, Cooper," Harold jeered, "or we'll light that cabin like a bonfire." Nate's voice dropped to a tone that promised violence. "Try." Before the men could answer, a gust of wind tore through the pines, and the first figure stepped into the open, raising a pistol. Nate fired first. The night exploded. Beatrice shielded Emma's head, knees shaking, heart roaring. Smoke filled the cabin. Outside, shouts erupted. Rage, pain, surprise. Nate reloaded instantly. "Stay down!" But Beatrice lifted her head. For the first time in her life, she didn't freeze, didn't crumble. She was terrified, but she wasn't helpless. She touched Nate's back. "You're not alone. We're with you." Nate didn't turn, but his voice, rough, fierce, trembling in a way she'd never heard, answered, "I know." For nearly a full minute after the last gunshot faded into the mountains, everything was still. No footsteps, no voices. Only the whisper of snow settling on the pine branches and the slow, steady sound of Nate's breathing. He lowered his rifle, but didn't relax. "Stay here," he murmured to Beatrice. "Don't move until I say." He opened the cabin door a sliver, barrel first. Cold air swept inside, carrying the metallic tang of gunpowder. Outside, 2 men lay groaning in the snow, their weapons scattered. A third had fled into the tree line, leaving only bloody tracks behind. And Harold Walsh, Beatrice's father, was on his knees, not wounded, but trembling. Nate had knocked the gun clean from his hands with the first shot, and now the old man's arms were up, shaking as though from the cold or from fear. Nate stepped outside, boots crunching into the snow. "You're done," he said, voice flat. "You come near this ridge again, I bury you on it." Harold spat a mixture of blood and snow. "She's my property. You stole—" Nate grabbed the front of his coat and hauled him to his feet with one hand. "You sold her," he snarled, "for $1. And I'm telling you this once, you come back for her, even think her name again, and I bury you right here under the snow." Harold opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to curse, but the sight in Nate's eyes killed whatever words he'd planned. He stumbled backward and fled, limping into the darkness, leaving the other two men to drag themselves after him. When Nate finally shut the cabin door, he sagged against it, exhaling hard. Beatrice stood where he'd left her, Emma clinging to her skirts. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear, and something else, something soft, something full. Nate holstered his rifle and moved toward them slowly, cautiously, as though afraid he might break them, or they might break him. "It's over," he said softly. Emma let go of Beatrice and threw herself into Nate's arms. "Daddy!" He caught her, held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "You're safe, Bug. You're safe. I'm here." When Emma released him, Nate straightened and looked at Beatrice, really looked at her. Snow melt from his coat dripped onto the floor. His hair was disheveled, his knuckles were bruised and raw, but his eyes held a depth Beatrice had never seen before, not just gratitude, not just relief, recognition. "Beatrice," he said quietly, stepping closer, "come here." She hesitated only long enough to feel her heart leap, then she stepped forward. When she reached him, Nate cupped her cheeks with both hands. His palms were rough, warm, real. "You stood beside me tonight," he whispered. "You protected Emma. You protected me. You fought while shaking with fear." His thumb wiped a streak of dirt from her cheek. "No one has ever fought for me like that," he said. "No one." Beatrice's breath trembled. "I couldn't let you face them alone. I couldn't lose this family." The word family shattered something inside Nate. He pulled her fully against him, arms wrapping around her in a way that wasn't duty, wasn't obligation, was want. "Beatrice," he whispered into her hair, "you're safe here." She closed her eyes. Warmth spread through her chest. "It's your home now," Nate said, pulling back just enough to look her in the eyes. "If you'll have it. If you'll have us." A tear slipped down Beatrice's cheek. "I already do." They stood together in the silent glow of the hearth. Beatrice, Nate, Emma. Three people who had found each other through brokenness and fear, now bound by something stronger. Not blood, not bargains, but choice. The cabin quieted long after the danger faded. Emma slept first, curled between the blankets Beatrice had warmed by the fire. Nate stayed awake a little longer, watching the flames dance across the wood, watching Beatrice breathe softly beside him. Outside, snow fell in slow, gentle flakes, as if the mountains themselves were finally at peace. Stories like theirs aren't born from perfection. They grow from broken places, from fear, from loss, from two people learning they don't have to walk alone. Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distance and silence. Where in the world are you listening from today? And if you still believe in love, even the kind that starts with $1 and ends with a family, stay with me. The next story is waiting for you.